Good morning and welcome to this elections monitor devoted to yesterday's elections in Austria to renew the country's lower house, the National Council. For the first time in the history of the post-war republic, the far right came first in a national election. The Freedom Party, FPÖ, which waged its campaign under the slogan Fortress Austria, Fortress of Freedom, won around 29% of votes and 56 seats. It's ahead of the Austrian People's Party, the ÖVP, of the outgoing Chancellor Karl Nehammer, with 26% and 52 seats. The Social Democratic Party, SPÖ, came third with 21%. The Liberal Neos Party won 9% of votes, and the Greens, who were in the governing coalition with the ÖVP, obtained 8%. For the FPÖ, the victory is an incomplete one, as it fell 36 seats short of a majority in the 138-seat National Council. Conversely, the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, who governed almost 40 years in total since 1945, could, if results go this way, hold a one-seat majority if they form a coalition, which they haven't said, they haven't talked about this yet. So where is Austria heading to? Does the FPÖ leader, Herbert Kickl, who is known for his radical views on migration and his sympathy for Putin's Russia, have a chance to become the first far-right chancellor in post-war Austria? Can't other parties form a coalition to prevent this from happening? What are the reasons for this vote? And could Austria become more like the Hungary of Viktor Orban, who is the ally of the Freedom Party in the European Parliament? All this matters for Austrians, of course, but also for the EU. What would be, for instance, the position of the next Austrian government on issues like support to Ukraine, migration, the Green Deal, enlargement, or the EU budget? To help you understand the situation and its impact for the EU, I am happy to welcome our two speakers for this elections monitor. First, Kathrin Stainer-Hämmerle, you are a professor of political science at the Carinthia University of Applied Sciences. Welcome and thank you. And Oliver Grimm, you are EU correspondent for Die Presse, an Austrian daily newspaper.
Hi.
I will start with you, Kathrin Stainer-Hämmerle. The FPÖ victory had been announced by all recent opinion polls, and it comes after the party already came first in the EU elections in June. It is therefore not really a surprise. But it is the first time it happens in an election for the National Council. So is it a turning point for Austria, a logical development in the country's political history, or the product of specific circumstances? So what sense can we make of this result, which has already generated quite a few reactions at EU level abroad, outside of Austria? So the floor is yours, Kathrin. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Maurice. Thank you for having me here. I will give my best in English to explain some of the very complicated situation I think Austria is in. So a surprise or not really. Yes, historical, definitely. The Freedom Party, they won the elections, but they were, as you just mentioned, almost 2 years ahead in all of the polls. So I must say that sometimes also announced revolutions really take place, and this was the case in Austria. But of course, there were many circumstances. I think most of them we find also in other European countries. That's the mistrust against the ruling parties, against the government. The people, they are a little bit afraid or skeptical looking into the future of democracy in general, but also in the personal future. And of course, for all that, the People's Party, the ÖVP, was punished. Also the Green parties, because they were in the government. But there were also other reasons, like I would say, really the Austrian parties have to take their responsibility. we had the Ibiza video, we had one young chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, who was like, 5 years ago, one of the big hopes of the Austrian politics, and it was demolished, this hope, really very quickly. And the Social Democrats, they were talking about each other, internal stuff and internal affairs and problems, and so they were unable to take advantage of its opposition role, actually. So I think it's a mix of developments in societies, also in political systems we see all over Europe, and also in other political, also in other elections that have taken place since the pandemic, actually, and also some circumstances where the parties, where the political leaders of all parties in Austria, did something really wrong. And this, I would mention here, especially the style of political communication, how they are talking with each other, how they are talking over each other, how they are talking about the topics. We had an election campaign that was also very dominated of fear, fear of climate change, fear of migration, fear of losing wealth. And there was no party really talking about how we can cope with our future, with all these challenges we have. And yes, at the end, we must say, then always the right wing, the right populist parties, they will win if we have this kind of emotions in a society dominating, and we have this kind of discussing challenges, discussing topics within the political elites.
Thank you. So you said the campaign was very much about fear, and I mentioned the fact that the slogan of FPÖ was Fortress Austria. So like campaigning on the protection of Austrians. So why do they feel so vulnerable? Why do they feel so weak, maybe? And what solutions or what arguments were the most important ones for the FPÖ to win so many votes?
Mm-hmm. So we had 3 main topics in the campaign. One was, of course, immigration, not the most important one. The most important was inflation. And then, of course, also one big topic, preventing the Freedom Party, preventing the FPÖ from being a chancellor, or on the other hand, of course, also preserving democracy. So if you have a topic in the middle of the political campaign for which one party stands for centuries, not centuries, decades, sorry, that was an English misinterpretation of my English, for decades, of course, it is very complicated or very hard for other parties to step in a short term. And for example, one example that's probably very easy to understand. The first time in this election, also women voted for the Freedom Party. It's the first time. We had always this gender gap in voting behavior between men and women. So young men prefer right parties, young women prefer left-green parties. But the first time in this election, also the Freedom Party was ahead amongst the women. So, and I thought about why could that happen? And my now very short explanation here is that we discussed, in fall, always school is starting. We discussed a lot of children without German speaking in the classes and what problems they cause there. So I think at this moment, when we discuss about problems of integration and in schools with children coming here or being here, not speaking German, then you really get to the women. Yes, not only because they have children, but it's a topic they are more interested probably than men. And I think all this discussing about this specific topic of integration was, for me, really one point that women were attracted also to this party. Another point is, of course, this interpretation of freedom they have. Not only the fortress, the second pillar was freedom. So what did they, or what do they mean still now when they are talking about freedom? Is, of course, one is the pandemic. And during the pandemic, we saw very clearly in the empirical research that the loss of trust for the political system went up to a social group where they earn a lot of money. So the highest third of the population, they said, no, I think the political system during the pandemic is not really working well in Austria. And the reason was not that they had the feeling that they were not well represented in the parliament or that their voices weren't heard like in other groups. The reason was very clear and simple. It was like, the state should not intervene in my private life. How they experienced that during the pandemic. So, and now we have this group of well-situated people. They are voting for the Freedom Party because they say, okay, first they started in the pandemic, keeping you at home, closing your job, closing your businesses, being vaccinated. Now they are coming with a climate change. Now you are not allowed anymore to drive with your car, to eat your schnitzel, very important in Austria. And then they go on. They tell you what you can say, what jokes you can make, what songs you have to sing. Yes, gender language, and so on. And I think with this topic, they reached also in a group in a society where people are, they have a high formal education. They earn a lot of money, so they don't have to fear future probably so much. But yes, it's this, the state politics, they try to suppress you, kind of, and this was for me also a very a very important reason. And the last big hit the FPÖ made is that those people who were out of the political system, probably, who were non-voters, we see a big shift from non-voting people to the Freedom Party also. And I think this is, yes, I'm not really satisfied what's going on in this country. And but now I have a new, how do you call that in English? Now I have a new mouthpiece for me, for the people, for the dissatisfied people, and this is also the Freedom Party. And this I can see that the Freedom Party was able to mobilize best non-voters. We see this in a higher voter turnout in general, but I have the figures. 258,000 people, they were non-voters, and now they were voting for the Freedom Party.
Thank you. Before going to what kind of coalition could result of these elections, I would like to ask Oliver about the outgoing coalition, which was between the Christian Democrats and the Greens. It was the first one, such one in Austria. What were its achievements and its weaknesses? Why people did vote against it? Are there really clear reasons? Did it not work so well? Or as Kathrin said, there are so many emotional reasons behind this vote that this coalition anyway could not go well in these elections. And I would just add, because I didn't mention it at the start, people in the audience can ask their questions in the Q&A, and we will pass them on later in this discussion. So Oliver.
Well, I think the outgoing coalition was as dysfunctional as, if you allow me the metaphor, as a couple that is just about to enter the courts to have their divorce formalized. It was dysfunctional to the point where the ÖVP was actually trying to take the Minister for Climate and Environment to court, because she had actually voted in favor of a law in the framework of the Council of Environment and Climate Ministers.
Of the European Union, not in
exactly.
Austria, at
yes,
EU level.
Yeah, in
yes,
Brussels.
Yeah.
The famous law about the renaturation of ecologically degraded public spaces. And the ÖVP was very much opposed to that. The climate minister, who's from the Greens, was in favor of that. And then in the end, she tipped the balance, because it was the Austrian vote that assured the majority for that vote. So actually, they took her to court for that. Of course, the judges threw out that thing immediately. But it gives you an idea of how dysfunctional this was. And in a sense, it's a pity, because when they formed the coalition, their sort of selling proposition to the public was, this is sort of the best of two worlds. We'll have the party of business, of the economy, of entrepreneurial spirit, which is how the ÖVP sees themselves. And on the other hand, we have the Greens, which is the party of ecological responsibility, the first party that actually made climate policies a mainstream issue. And so if you put them together, you'll come up with good solutions on how to deal with what is, I would argue, still one of the biggest existential questions for humanity, how to deal with climate change. It didn't turn out as it was planned. The main reason, I would assume, but I'd be happy to be challenged on that, is of course the pandemic, which basically broke out shortly after they had actually started governing. So that actually turned many of their plans to moot. It was obvious the government couldn't really focus on climate policies coupled to competitiveness enhancing or pro-business policies to satisfy the ÖVP. And so basically, like every government, they were busy dealing with a massive health crisis. And I think what probably set Austria apart from other countries is that they, ironically, at the tail end of the pandemic, when it was obvious that, okay, we have vaccination, okay, the mutations of the virus are turning a bit less deadly, they had the idea to introduce a legal obligation to get vaccinated. And I think this really riled many people that Professor Stainer-Hämmerle referred to, people who are actually not FPÖ voters habitually, who are well off, who actually profit from Austria being an open society that is well established in international economy, that is doing well in the EU. But people who said, actually, you're not going to force me to get vaccinated. It's my decision. And on top of that, and that's just to finish off my first observations there, they not only introduced this by law, but they actually never followed through. So that was you could almost say, a very Austrian way of dealing with an existential problem. We pretend it's very serious. We announce something very, very draconic, but then actually we don't really follow up.
So if I understand correctly, this coalition was a failure. So does it make it more difficult to envisage a coalition between the Christian Democrats and partners on the left or center left because of all these differences? Or is a new period being opened now, and anyway, they would need another partners if Greens and Christian Democrats want to go together again? So are they willing to try to form a coalition, these two parties?
Frankly, I'm not privy to the internal negotiations of either of these parties. I'd, however, be very surprised if the Greens were part of the next federal government. And I think they've already resigned themselves to accepting they're going to be in the opposition for the next 5 or so years. I think the upshot of this election, and nobody's really talking about it, and maybe I can just lob this idea into a discussion. I would argue it's a Pyrrhic victory for the FPÖ. First of all, they didn't cross the magical 30% threshold, and I think the outstanding absentee ballots that are still going to be counted today and on Thursday are not going to change that. That is impossible. So they stay below 30%, which for some reasons all over Europe seems to be psychologically very salient for many observers. In spite of the fact that conditions for them were perfect. You have a weak government, you have a weak leadership in both former main parties, the ÖVP and the SPÖ. You have a massive war in Europe. You have a cost of living issue that has not gone away and that is still particularly present in Austria. And in spite of all this, they didn't make it over 30%. And on top of that, they've radicalized themselves and their language to a degree where actually building alliances, finding compromise with other parties is close to impossible. And so my working assumption would be that after some, licking of wounds and, overcoming headaches, the ÖVP will basically reach out to the SPÖ, the Social Democrats, who are also badly bruised, although not as bad as the ÖVP, which had the worst defeat in its history. And they will also probably reach out to NEOS, the small Liberal Party that did pretty well, but not as well as they hoped. They're at 9%, but it's still, I think, the best results on a federal level. And I think they will try to stitch together a coalition with these three parties.
Thanks. You mentioned compromise, and I think the federal president van der Bellen last night emphasized the need for parties to compromise to be able to form a coalition. So I would ask Kathrin Stainer-Hämmerle. So if I understand, if I'm correct, it is up to the president to nominate a candidate for chancellor who would have to form a coalition, or would the parties, depending on their discussions, would create the path for the president to choose this candidate for chancellor? So who has the momentum now? And given what Oliver said about the radicalization of FPÖ, is it really a Pyrrhic victory? Are they out of the picture already? So what can we expect from the next days and weeks for the next government, for the formation of the next government? You're still on mute, sorry.
Sorry, I've seen it.
Thank you.
Yes, but this is really very hard to answer because in the next days we see mostly personal decisions. So is Herbert Kickl, for example, willing to step back, to make it possible for his party to join a government? Or will, on the other hand, Andreas Babler, so the party head of party of the Social Democrats, be still in position or not, and really also get the mandate to make negotiations with the People's Party for next government. So this we do not know, and I think now we have to wait how personal decisions will take place in these days. But yes, of course, with Herbert Kickl, it's more or less I see no way how the Freedom Party can find a partner for a majority in parliament, because the Freedom Party, the People's Party, they said very clearly, and not only Karl Nehammer, that there will be no government in Austria with the People's Party and Herbert Kickl as a partner. So this is not the problem of that they have no issues together, that they have no. I mean, they could, I think, make a program for the next coalition within a few days. But the persons, yeah, that would be very hard. And this is more or less Herbert Kickl is the big problem. So, and on the other hand, of course, the Social Democrats and the People's Party, they have a long history together. There are also forces in both parties which support also a coalition, but also they have the experience that they did it time in Austria, and at the end, the People's Party, the Freedom Party got bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger. So for me, Herbert Kickl, he has the lowest pressure to go into a coalition. The Social Democrats with Andreas Babler, they expected Karl Nehammer and the People's Party, of course, they want to stay in the Chancellor, they want to have the Chancellor again. And also the Liberals, the Neos, I think they now say it's time just to switch the role from opposition to a ruling to a government, a party in government. So Herbert Kickl, I think he could lay back and say what will come will come. We are always the victims, and probably we can only wait a few years more, and then we have also a bigger success in the elections, and then it's really the point where we can make also the rules for the next coalition and not only be invited as a partner. So you mentioned Alexander van der Bellen and his role as a president. The constitution says that he is free to nominate the chancellor. And the only thing he has to think of is that the chancellor and also the government, and of course, is not they don't have to be elected in parliament, but they don't have to face a votum of mistrust in parliament. So Alexander van der Bellen, of course, he's free. That says the constitution, but he needs a chancellor with a stable majority. And who will negotiate the next days with whom? It's not really in the hand of the president. Of course, he will have now some dialogues. He will invite all the parties to see what possibilities we have in Austria, and he will prefer, of course, one coalition without Herbert Kickl and also without the Freedom Party. But if there's an agreement between, that's the only way, the Freedom Party and of course the ÖVP, the People's Party, then he has, no influence to say, no, I don't want this, I want another solution, I want another majority. So the next days, I think he will talk with all the leaders behind closed doors. He will see what is possible, what majorities are possible without the Freedom Party. But if the People's Party, they will decide if they are planning a majority with the People's Party, with the Freedom Party. So we will have it. And Alexander van der Bellen will be forced to also accept also this coalition. Probably not Herbert Kickl as chancellor. I think this is not a risk for him, because also the People's Party, the ÖVP, they will not choose this option. But probably one other scenario is Karl Nehammer will have negotiations with the Social Democrats. They will fail at the end, and then they will say, before we have new elections in Austria, we are more or less forced to make a coalition with the Freedom Party. The Freedom Party must find a good job for Herbert Kickl, not in the government, but there's this one very interesting discussion going on. since yesterday, this is the chairman of the parliament. Normally, only usus, not really in the constitution. Normally, the strongest party has the right of this place. So this is the second highest formally position in the republic we have. So there's the president, then there's the chairman of parliament, and then is the chancellor, formally, not really in power, but formally. And probably this is an attractive place also for Herbert Kickl. Then he's definitely not part of the government, but he has also a role. But we will see also this is a very personal decision Herbert Kickl has to take, and all the other parties, they said probably we now break the first time also with this tradition that the chairman in parliament will get the strongest party. So we will see if also here we see some changes in the way of politics is working in Austria.
And if Herbert Kickl agrees or is pushed to accept another position, who in FPÖ could be a candidate for chancellor? What kind of chancellor shall we expect if we go into this direction?
Okay, this is very speculative, and I cannot answer this question.
Is it someone as radical as him, or are there different options within the party?
I mean, what the Austrian People's Party always tried to do is that there were two freedom parties, one with Herbert Kickl, more radical, and one more who's, I don't know how to explain that, but actually there is one People's Party, and it will be one People's Party, one Freedom Party, sorry. It will be one Freedom Party because Herbert Kickl, he is the manager behind the scenes since years, and he developed the whole party, and they all will follow him. So I would not call another person a Muppet on a string or something like that, but they are one party definitely. But I see the attempt of Karl Nehammer and his team just to open some doors, or to let them to let them be open to negotiate with some other persons in the Freedom Party. So we will see what are the red lines at the end. I think yes, these are the sanctions with Russia, for example. Of course, also asylum politics, that they say there's no way to make zero immigration in Austria. And what's really important for the president is that there will be at least a preamble in the program, in the treaty of the following government, that they will of course respect European Union policies and the treaties, and they will stay in the European Union also. At the end, what we will get is more or less hard to see, because things are changing very quickly. But I'm sure that if the Freedom Party will take decisive role in the next government, we will become more allies with Hungary than with Brussels.
So Oliver, seen from Brussels, how do you feel the reactions from politicians or institutions here? Are there fear that indeed Austria could go towards playing the role of a second Hungary, or is it more open than that? Because Austria has a lot of interest in playing the games of the EU politics. What would you say of the next priorities? Because even if FPÖ is not in government, it will put a lot of pressure on any coalition. So what can we expect in terms of positioning from the next Austrian government, and what would be the consequences for the EU?
Well, first of all, I was a bit taken aback yesterday evening when I read the quick and very hot takes of some of my highly esteemed colleagues from way more prestigious publications that I'm glad to work for, comparing Austria to Hungary, drawing the quick conclusion that this is a confirmation of the, uninhibited forward march of fascism all over Europe and so forth. Well, first of all, I think people should be reminded that none of the parties represented in the next parliament will have a blocking minority to prevent constitutional change, which might sound counterfactual, but actually might provide a huge opportunity for a coalition without the FPÖ to fix certain things that during the past 5 years couldn't be fixed, because somebody always had, especially the ÖVP, although it was in the government, had a blocking minority. So you have to understand, in Austria, the constitution is not only some sacrosanct text that actually sets out how the country is run, how the state is supposed to be run, but over the decades, there was sort of a very unsavory habit of introducing constitutional or actually, putting certain laws on a constitutional level. And one of the famous, I think, examples was some regulation about taxi, the way that taxes are being regulated and so forth. So if you want to reform the country, and if you want to sort of, reply to, I think, a certain desire in huge parts of society to, fix the educational system, fix the way that housing, for example, is lacking more and more, which is a thing we haven't really spoken about. But housing is a big issue, especially in the cities, and not only in Vienna. It's becoming more and more of an issue even in smaller cities and towns. It's less and less affordable for young people, especially. So if you would want to do this, a new coalition of ÖVP, SPÖ, and NEOS, or the Greens, could, together with the Greens against the FPÖ, do that. So basically, if all these purportedly democratic, pro-European, pro-liberal society parties would get together and say, we want to reform this country and do things that haven't been done for years because somebody was always blocking somebody else, they could do that together, and the FPÖ could not stop that. So I think this is good news, and I'm not sort of desperately looking for little glimmers of hope. You were asking about what that election would mean for Europe. I think the big challenges, or the big questions that Europe has to face in the next years will sort of, I think, regardless of which government we get, the fundamental position of that government would be very similar. I think no new Austrian government, for example, would be in favor of increasing the European budget. And of course, we'll have negotiations about the next multi-annual financial framework, which will probably kick off after the German federal elections next year. So, even if the Social Democrats are in there, the next Austrian finance minister or next Austrian prime minister is not going to go to Brussels and say, yeah, actually, we're in favor of doubling the European budget because there are so many fantastic things the EU should do and it needs the financial means. So don't expect the Austrians to leave the frugal 4 or frugal 5 or frugal whatever. On migration and asylum, the Austrian government did actually support, grosso modo, the asylum and migration pact, but there were several bits where they actually abstained, and they are particularly unhappy with the, and I hope any migration and asylum experts listening to this are not going to be irate, because I can't remember the actual term, but there's this one bit that sets out what happens in an emergency situation. So if there's a member state that's sort of dealing with an influx of irregular migrants that it can't really, and asylum applicants that it can't really deal with it, and then there's some sort of mechanism where either you help them or you pay. The Austrians are not happy with that because they say, and I think they're quite correct, look, we already have per capita the biggest number of asylum seekers, or we are always amongst the 3 countries with the biggest numbers of asylum seekers. Next thing on the line, on the list, should Romania and Bulgaria join Schengen? The Commission thinks yes. I think 25 member states think so too. I'm not sure about the new Dutch government's position. The ÖVP currently said no. That'll be a question that needs to be resolved fairly soon after the new government enters into office. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they wiggle out of that, because the position is basically untenable. There's no factual reason for preventing them to join. If you don't want Romania and Bulgaria in Schengen, then how do you justify Hungary not being kicked out of Schengen, right? And as regards enlargement, I think there's something I never understood. All Austrian governments, including the ones that the FPÖ took part in, were adamantly in favor of EU enlargement, especially the Western Balkan countries. But if you look at opinion polling, the Austrian society is adamantly opposed. You will not find a majority amongst citizens for this. And I would even argue that the opposition to that is rising. So how they're going to square actually being in favor of enlargement, but seeing that this is not a position that cuts it with the public, that'll also be a huge challenge for the next government.
Thanks. I would ask you another question on migration, because it will be a topic for the next European Council meeting in October, after Germany's decision to close its borders, or to at least increase the border controls. The new Dutch government is also asking for some kind of revision of the pact. So would Austria, whatever the government, because of the result of these elections, would be another additional country pushing to review already the rules of the pact? And a collaterate topic, the new EU commissioners for migration is from Austria. So is there a kind of, not cooperation, because we know commissioners do not represent their countries or work for their countries, but still politically, he's a candidate from the EPP, which is the majority of politically in the commission. So on these topics of migration, is there a new situation in which Austria could be more influential and pushing for changes and maybe tougher policies?
Well, it's always good to know that there's still people who believe in the myth of the European commissioners leaving their national passports at the entrance of the commission building, you know. Anyway, on Magnus Brunner, I can only talk from personal experience when he came here during the ECOFIN and Eurogroup meetings. I always thought he's very well prepared. I have the impression he's pretty intelligent. He was interested in these topics, and I think I've covered about 5 or 6 finance ministers. I wouldn't vouch for every one of them being really interested in what's going on in ECOFIN, unless it's interesting in terms of domestic policies and how you can actually use that to bash the EU. And actually, he was, you know, even when we asked him questions about Austrian government positions in ECOFIN that were a bit problematic, he was never annoyed. He was actually always a good sport. So I think he'll be a good European commissioner, provided he survives the hearings, which I think he will, because he'll be well briefed. I don't really understand why Madame von der Leyen had the idea, or her head of cabinet, Björn Seibert probably, to put Brunner in that field of politics, because he has no exposure and experience with migration and asylum. My interpretation would be that she actually wants to weaken the commissioners by making sure that they're going to spend the first 2 years of the mandates trying to figure out what they're talking about. And so everything is even going to be more centralized on von der Leyen and her team. I don't really think this is going to give Austria a more prominent role in the debate about asylum and migration that it already has. I mean, it has been very vocal. It started with Sebastian Kurz already, who after the big migration crisis of 2015 and 16, and that was, I think, one of the reasons why he gained such prominence both in Austria and on the European stage, because he realized there's something that many other parties try to tiptoe around and not sort of deal with, because it's a bit sensitive. You know, Karl Nehammer, the current Bundeskanzler, did the same thing. He was always, you know, whenever he came to European councils, I had the impression the only thing he's interested in is talking about migration and asylum, even if it's not on the agenda. And I think they will keep doing that. I don't really think it's going to give them more of a sort of a lever to move the Commission in a direction that they would like to see it, because the Commission is basically doing things they and the Italians and the Dutch and whoever wants anyway, you know, more money for border protection, tightening of asylum procedures, quicker deportations and so forth. So, yeah.
Thank you. Kathrin Stainer-Hämmerle, if we look at the two main priorities of the EU for the new mandate, these are competitiveness, so economic and this industrial policy, and security and defense, including the support for Ukraine. From a domestic perspective, how do the Austrian citizens or the public opinion influence the positions of the government in Brussels on these issues? Was it a big part of the campaign, and can we expect the next government to be on some kind of pressure by the population not to support Ukraine, not to invest in defense? We know that Austria is a neutral country, and it's also a debate in the country. Oliver mentioned that Austria will remain within the frugal states, but in terms of industrial policy, especially on green technologies, how do Austrians see these kind of evolutions and decisions to be taken at EU level?
So, I mean, we don't know who is sitting in the next government, so I cannot really answer the question if people can put up pressure in what direction. But what we see is that there is unfortunately no discussion about neutrality. We discussed, of course, security issues, the war, the sanctions, always, but a little bit like the Freedom Party, that they try to be, you know, that they have an outstanding position, distinguishing itself from all the others. Yes, of course, we should discuss neutrality, and this will be a big gap probably in a new coalition between the Freedom Party and the of course also People's Party, but also between the People's Party and the Liberals, for example, on the other hand. That what will be the role of Austria in a future security architecture in Europe? Yeah, there are really the positions, they differ very widely, and for this reason, I think they do not want to have a discussion, because most of the Austrians believe that neutrality is still the key for wealth, security, and success. Even though it's not true, we all know, and it's not real neutrality, because we will be partner of Sky Shield and so on. But there is no way to get a majority changing their mind. So this is one reason. The other big issue is, of course, immigration. I mean, the biggest problem besides of climate change is the demographic change in our country. You can focus all our problems with this headline. It's the labor shortage, it's you know, care and health, and then of course also economic growth and budget. But also here I see that people in Austria, they are not able to see some positive aspects, yes, of immigration. And yes, Oliver Grimm, I agree, if all the other parties find together, yeah, to take big steps in big issues, the Freedom Party, they will lose all the ground, all the sentiments. They are now having all this success. But I also experienced that the last years, where we all see what is coming, yeah, what will happen, that did not take place really. So the problem is if the People's Party and of course the Social Democrats could find together to make some reforms in the pension system, in of course the education, and also with integration policy. Of course, we would develop much more better, but I'm very skeptical that this will happen now, because why? What changed really? Okay, the Freedom Party, they won the election, but they won't come into a government, so they will go on like before, because some seats more for opposition party does not really change the game. So, but I hope, I'm always optimistic, so I hope that all the other parties will see this last call for action. I would say this results, and they will now find some answers together, and more respect in working together and speaking with each other. The position of Austria in the European Union, also in the issue of migration, of course it changed, because I know the commissioner, also Magnus Brunner, is a key player then, not to support the Austrian positions, but it would be very embarrassing for him if Austria is not following his suggestions. So this will, of course, also change a little bit the Austrian position. And yes, we will see. I don't think that we have Herbert Kickl as a chancellor and Magnus Brunner as a commissioner. That would be really very hard for him, more harder than actually the problems he has with the portfolio. But he will also fight with the Austrian coalition if there are the Social Democrats and the People's Party. They say also that the Chancellor took the choice for the Commission on Austria. I don't know if it's true, but we heard this, and I find this very interesting. Probably it was also a little bit an attempt to make, how do you say that, to fix the positions that we have to follow a specific policy in immigration, because we have also the commissioner there in Brussels.
Thanks. We also have a question on the role Ukraine played during the campaign. And I would also add the role Russia played, and the question of energy played during the campaign. Was it a big topic discussed by the parties? Is it something very salient in public opinion? How would you analyze that?
Yes. There was a very simple answer of Herbert Kickl, how to combat the inflation. That was that Austria's success was built on cheap gas from Russia, and why should we leave this path? So, like, right, populist parties always do, a simple receipt for dissolving really complex situations, but Herbert Kickl, he said, let's stop the sanctions against Russia. Why should we do that as a neutral country? And if we get, again, the cheap gas from Russia, then all the prices will drop. So, I mean, we see 30% almost of the Austrian voters, they follow also this way of thinking. Yes, the Ukraine, of course, also a little bit, but I'm not sure if the Freedom Party, they have one, trick they do all the time since the 1990s, since Jörg Haider. They were always looking a little bit for the gap. Other parties leave them, and then they step into this gap. So this was the same with the pandemic, with vaccination and lockdown. In a moment where all the other parties are united in a position, they step on the other side, whether it makes sense or not. Of course, the Freedom Party in Austria, they say no sanctions. That means, of course, no support for the Ukraine. But yeah, the luck is that the right wing and right parties, in Europe, they are not united very much in this topic, because some of them, they, have more sympathy for Putin, and some of them, they are really more afraid of the Russian attempts also, and the Russian aggression. So I don't think, or I think this will be an Austrian solution. We are against, or we are for the enlargement, for example, of the European Union, or against the sanctions, or the climate programs for the climate change. But we do not actively follow our positions. Other things are more important. So yes, like the vaccination, Oliver told us, we have some solutions, but now we have other things on the top of the agenda.
Thank you. That will be my last question to Oliver, because we have less than 4 minutes left. If there is a government with the FPÖ and sanctions come in the discussions, can we envisage a veto or threat of veto of Austria? And more generally, what are the main leverage of Austria to advance its positions and interests in Brussels as a mid-sized country?
Well, I mean, if there were to be an FPÖ-led government, which again is not my working assumption, but okay, let's speculate about that. Of course, there will be threats of sanctions. They'd follow the line of the current Hungarian government. However, do you think that the EU sanctions regime will go way beyond the 14 rounds of sanctions we've already had? I don't see any political will in Europe to go significantly, substantially beyond what we already have. So in a sense, I mean, it's depressing, because I think the sanctions regime is both leaky and it's insufficient, because it doesn't cover the key sources of income of the Kremlin's regime. But I don't see any political will to go beyond that. And I think the main reason for that is Germany, and the fact that there are German elections next autumn. So I don't expect any more sanctions until next autumn, any significant ones. There will be tiny cosmetic changes, closing of loopholes and so forth. How does a mid-sized / smallish country like Austria leverage its influence in Europe? I'd rather look at mid-sized countries that are more successful in doing so, because there was an interesting study. You should look it up. I hope I'm not saying something that is improper, but it's by one of your competitors. The European Council on Foreign Relations did an interesting network study, like I think 4 or 5 years ago, about how the different member states form coalitions in the council. So they looked at all the votes and then looked at who voted with whom. And it will be, I think, interesting to repeat that exercise. And it showed that actually Austria is amongst the most isolated countries. It follows Germany on most votes. There would be an interest in countries like Croatia, for example, or Slovenia, to propose certain things in council, but Austria is not really following up on that. And it has no relationships at all with, for example, the Benelux countries, France, and so forth. So, if I were the next prime minister, and I think Austria is happy enough not to have me as a prime minister, I definitely think very hard about how this country that is geographically so well positioned in the heart of Europe could actually profit from really doing something that Mr. Nehammer doesn't tire of saying, and it doesn't make it any more true, which is he's building bridges. He's not built any bridges so far. And that, I think, will be the key, I think, task for the next chancellor to think about how to find like-minded countries in Europe and deal with problems that basically are surpassing our national borders.
Well, that's a good conclusion, a good food for thought for the next chancellor. Thank you very much, Oliver Grimm. Thank you very much, Kathrin Stainer-Hämmerle, and thanks for the people who followed us, and now we'll wait for the Chancellor and the next government. Thank you very much and have a good day and a good week. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good one.